Anyway, so this is on behalf of the Endowment Committee. Again, I just met both of you. My name is Paul Gottlieb. I'm the chairman of the Endowment Committee, so we're really excited to be putting on this estate planning seminar tonight. First of all, Sheila, thank you so much for all of everything, setting this up, as well as Ben, thank you for filming. We have John Thornburg here tonight. John is a representative of the Texas Methodist Foundation out of Austin, but he actually is, I guess, our local representative right in Dallas. So he's the Dallas area consultant for anything, anytime anything comes up with the Texas Methodist Foundation. So he's going to be talking about this right here, putting your house in order, which is really just kind of a high-level overview of estate planning. So there's two things. I want to make sure you have this and then this. This is a brochure on the endowment. So just some good information for you in there as well. Before we get started, I want to start off with one question and just throw out your answer. It's just a number. What percentage of people do you think die without a will? And you can't answer. Well, 55?
45%.
45%, okay.
That's because
Well, you know what, though? Then it's actually getting better because the last statistic I had was higher than that. But my statistic was a couple years old. So
55% don't, so 45% do.
yeah. Well, you cheated. Actually, you just know how to read, so good job.
Did you need us to tell me to look over it?
I did.
Oh, you did?
Oh, see, he didn't know I was going to do that. Anyway, so John, come on up, and John also is a pastor, so I'm going to let him pray before we get started, and if y'all have questions, just stop us and stop him.
Okay.
Thank you for coming, John.
Thank you, Paul. Well, friends, it's a delight to be with you, and I greet you on behalf of the staff of the Texas Methodist Foundation. We're headquartered in Austin. We're a 75-year-old organization which is deeply devoted to helping the churches of the United Methodist Churches of Texas achieve their God-appointed missions. And some of that is through financial services and loan making, and some of it is through leadership services. And so we are a $430 million lending institution, but a lot more. So it's a delight to be with you. Let's begin with prayer. Lord, I thank you for this amazing day that you've given us. I thank you and drop to my knees and say thank you for giving us every breath we've drawn today. Thank you for all the people you've brought our way that gave us hope. Thank you for this church and its ministry. Thank you for the hope you provide us in Jesus Christ. We're so grateful for all of this, and now we pray, send the power of your Holy Spirit on us gathered here out of love for you and out of love for your church, and do good things among us tonight. In Jesus' name, amen. Okay, so on this sheet that says generous from beginning to end, there is a verse from a hymn. And this hymn actually goes to the tune of What a Friend We Have in Jesus. So I'm going to act as though you all will sing with me. And so here we go. Take my gifts and let me love you. Oops, that's too low. Take my gifts and let me love you. God, who first of all loved me, gave me light and food and shelter, gave me life and set me free. Now, because your love has touched me, I have love to give away. Now the bread of love is rising, loaves of love to multiply. I love this phrase of this extraordinary poet from New Zealand, Shirley Murray, who writes these words, Now, because your love has touched me, I have love to give away. And I think that maybe is a subtext of the whole evening. We've been given more than we could possibly say thank you for. And because we've been filled with the love of God, we have love to give away. Now, the specific ways in which we're talking about giving our love away tonight is by paying attention to end-of-life issues, where if you pay attention to them, you offer your family a whole lot of love by being careful with your affairs and by planning ahead. So the purpose, we'll go a half hour or so and see where we are. So the purpose of the gathering is twofold. One, to talk about some important end-of-life issues, and second, because you're members of a really vital congregation, you can also be seed planters with the folks you circulate with in the church, of saying, how can we help this congregation be more deeply invested in the stewardship dimension of end-of-life issues? If people love the Lord and love their church, do they know how to help, to give some thought to leaving gifts to the church in their will? So, because I am not an attorney and have been sternly warned by my employer not to practice law without a license, this is more, I hope, to raise some things you may not have thought about before, or if you do not currently have a will, to get you ready for an appointment you might have with an attorney or with a certified financial planner. So let's walk in. Paul kind of led us into this. 55% of Americans die without a will. That's a lot. There are reasons for this, and there are consequences to it. Now, what are the reasons that we don't make a will? Well, here are the ones we've heard the most. I don't want to think about death. Only rich people need wills. I can't afford one. I don't have time now. I don't have an attorney. My family will divide things when I'm gone. And number 7, I'll do it just before I die. Now, okay, so laziness may come in too. But there really are consequences to dying without a will. It may be extremely costly. Then the state of Texas will have elaborate plans for what to do with your money and your possessions. The court, if there are disputed things about children or relatives, the court chooses guardians. The court selects administrators. The court determines special needs. And I think most germane to our talking in the church context, if you die without a will, there is no provision for charity. And so would you look now in the clipped sheet that I gave you, there is a thing that says requirements for a valid will. And much of what I've brought you tonight is yours, because I know you know how to read, so I'm not going to go through them. But I'm hoping that this will be helpful if you don't yet have a will, just to think about. And it could be that the whole issue of not having a will extends far beyond you, maybe to dear ones in your extended family, others that you're thinking about. So, for example, in the state of Texas, just basic things. You have to be 18 to have a will. It has to be written. In other words, in the state of Texas, there is no such thing as an oral will. You tell somebody what you want. And Interestingly, there are in some states what are referred to as holographic wills, things that you write with a pen yourself. Those are not valid in Texas. Um, for a will to be valid, it has to be witnessed. Can't just write something out or type something out and say, well, I said what I wanted. Um, so here's where this whole matter of saying, well, I don't know an attorney or they cost too much. I think my simple word to you is it costs a lot more not to have one. It costs a lot more. So these are the four basic requirements. Five basic requirements, and I think it's pretty well stated here. So if you have a will, good for you. If you haven't updated it in the last 3 years, it might be worth considering that. If you haven't updated it in 10 or more, it's really time to do that. Now, let's turn for a moment and look at this resource that you've been handed, Putting Your House in Order. Now, whether this is for you or for a loved one, and it could be either, what this provides is the extraordinary opportunity that your loved ones, upon your death, are spared some really extraordinary heartache, frustration, maybe even desperation, looking for documents about you that are important, and they don't know where to find them. Now, there are reasons for this. Some people say my affairs are very private, and I don't keep my strong box out in the public, and so when it comes time, it'll come time, and I've got a will. There are just ever so many things where the more you have prepared for this moment, the more your family gets to grieve you rather than spend time in desperation determining the extent of your affairs. So there's an opening page to my loved ones, and this is just where you say, I did this for you. I really do care about you finding all this stuff. Go to the next page. It says what to do after a loved one dies, and this is just, we hope and pray, an extraordinarily helpful set of first things. And so the location of your will, the location of your important financial papers, how to contact the Social Security Administration, and then particular things here. So for example, at number 5, where it says obtain at least 10 copies of the death certificate. Sometimes when you get into like you're sitting with a funeral director and you're making plans, and the funeral director looks at you and says, how many copies of the death certificate will you need? And there'd be lots of people who have no way of knowing how to answer that question. Well, what would I need them for? And you need them for all manner of things where you have assets, bank accounts, and all manner of things. And so this piece of advice to obtain at least 10 copies of the death certificate is a really solid piece of advice. You can get more after that. The funeral home or others can help you do that. And so this is kind of a first thing. And then if you'll turn over the page, what we've done here is, and I don't know whether you printed it in color. Mm-hmm. Oh, okay, great, super. So the blue pages are your.
No, I'm sorry.
Oh, okay, all right.
The cover's in color.
Yeah, right. No worries. So the first set of pages are titled Funeral Memorial Service Wishes. And now I promise I will come back and talk in a little more detail about this, but I just want to show you the extent of this resource right now. And I do thank Paul and the Endowment Committee for providing this. We hope and pray that it's deeply helpful. So in this are some of the decisions that if you haven't made them, you find out these are some of the decisions I would have to make. And you also specify what kind of service you want, whether you want newspaper notices, whether you want people to be able to send flowers. I mean, just the sorts of things that when you are in the midst of a shock, it's just really hard to make decisions. And if you don't have someone sitting beside you, whether it's a pastor or a close friend who has his or her wits kind of together, sometimes it's just desperately hard to make decisions at that time. Scripture passages, favorite hymns or songs, who you want to preside, and then who you want to, this is on page 3, who you'd like to eulogize, who the pallbearers would be. So this is just quite specific to funeral planning. Then on page 4, just the stuff about you. Now, why would you do this? Because one of the hardest things, if you choose, for example, to have an obituary, then whoever's going to write it may say, now what year did this happen, or where did she work? And if you've provided this, and you haven't written or sketched out an obituary yourself, then people say, oh, wow, now we've got it, so great. It's also really helpful if the person is a veteran that you've got the particular information here, because in the case of the death of a veteran, that may come into play at the funeral or memorial service, and so you'd want people to know that. And then we were simply trying to take into account just about anything. So on page 6, you would actually list your relatives, and that would be, has everyone heard about your death? We can't assume that the grapevine in your family is active all the time. And then other people to be notified. So now then on page 7 we start with family records, and again it just becomes surprising how helpful this can be. To some extent, have you ever, with any of your loved ones, I know this is true with me and with my parents, there are certain things I only find out if I ask the right questions. I was talking to my mother. I did an event years ago, singing gospel songs with at a retirement home, and I talked to my mother after, and she said, "Oh, what'd you sing?" And I told her a few things. She said, "Well, my favorite is," and I said, "Mom, when were you going to tell me that?" Then she told me all this stuff I never knew. Well, the more of this stuff you record, it's helpful. Now, there is some business stuff, as you see on page 11, personal accounts and business accounts and investments. That can prove really, really, really helpful. So this is just a way of honoring the people who are going to be dealing with your assets, everything, insurance and liabilities and your real property, your furniture, your automobiles, etc., personal effects. Ouch. Sometimes if you have really things that are precious to you and you're not aware that people in your family have kind of had their eye on those things, this can get a little touchy. And so if you specify who you hope, who you are designating to receive those things, you may be able to short circuit all manner of family arguments and such. So these pages are about caring enough about the people that you love and who love you to provide them a way to deal really responsibly with your accumulated assets. Now, what you find from page 16 onward are samples of some of the legal documents in addition to a will that people customarily draw up, oftentimes at the same time that they're drawing up their will. So, for example, the statutory durable power of attorney, and that's about who has the authority to make, for example, business decisions if you are incompetent to make them yourselves. And then the parallel document, which you find at page 19, medical power of attorney, that is designating to a representative the responsibility to make a medical decision in the case that you are unable to make it yourself. Now, please keep in mind that we provide these samples not for you to tear them out of the book, fill them in, and think that you're done. We provide these so that you can read this stuff in preparation for a visit with an attorney, in which this would be duly drawn up. And let me say, and then at page 24 you find directive to physicians and family or surrogates, sometimes known as a living will. Let me say that there's nothing completely cut and dried about advance directives, about living wills. The central reality of these documents is that those who are providing medical care to you and your loved ones know what your wishes are. Because sometimes the law allows a doctor to disregard something even if you've specified it. And so the best way you can be prepared in terms of medical needs is to make your desires deeply clear to your primary care physician. Not deeply and repeatedly. And just because you've made the decision about what you want, doesn't do any good unless you let your physicians know it. Because you say, well, I was clear, I wrote it out. And the doctor says, I wish I had known that. And so what we have in the book is these samples of documents that, some of which will apply to you, some not. And they are provided so that when you have this meeting with whichever professional it is, whether you're physicians or your attorney, you've at least got some vocabulary in mind, and you're saying, now I've read about this, tell me what's going on here. Now, we good so far? Okay. Let me go back and dig in just a little bit on a few of these things. I've just now mentioned this whole matter of these advanced directives and other things. In the packet, in the clipped packet, I provided you a document that is from the American Bar Association. And it's basically a Q&A about advanced directives. And I know that when we've done this workshop, people have found it helpful. It's this one called Myths and Facts about Healthcare Advanced Directives. So I'm really hopeful that will illuminate some of the questions of advanced directives. it will walk you into what the ambiguities are, but the basic message of this document is let your healthcare providers know what your wishes are. So I'm hopeful that this is really, really helpful to you. Okay. Now, here's another thing where you may be saying, it's not time for me to make this decision. But do you have a burial site or a columbarium obtained? Now, let me step one step back from that. This is a question, and believe me, your family members may have some deep feelings about this. Because here we're talking about, at the point of my death, do I want to be buried or do I want to be cremated? Now, I can report to you, this is no value judgment, that the direction things are going in American culture is largely toward cremation. I can't explain exactly why. I can only report to you that that's really growing. And but I think if there are key members of your family who really have some investment in what happens to you, it's important to talk to them. Or if maybe you're talking to your own spouse, or you're talking to your children, or you're talking to whichever loved ones are important to talk to about that. Burial. Well, some people choose burial because their loved ones have a real hard time imagining your body being burned. That's an emotional hurdle. And if you don't have the conversation with them about that to discern whether they have those deep feelings, then it may be harder for them at the moment, and they're arguing amongst others. So I just urge that when the time is right to have the appropriate conversation about this. Why do people choose? Well, and some people choose burial because they want to have a place that their loved ones can visit. Now, the truth is, with cremation, you can have a place for your loved ones to visit because the funeral home industry has made some real adjustments to this reality in America, so that there are mausoleums at most of the major cemeteries, and an increasing number of churches are building what are called columbariums, those places in which urns with ashes can be placed. Now, just because there are burial sites doesn't mean you have to choose one. Let me be clear. But then again, there are some people who don't want grandma on the mantle. And others who have an attachment. There's something, and there's no explaining this. And I think there's no reason to think that there's one that's the perfect and godly way, and others that are just cheap. But these are matters that carry with them some measure of emotionality, and so maybe the first thing to do is discern where you are on it. What's my wish, and then how do I communicate my wish to my loved ones? And if you discover that you have a difficult moment with a loved one who thinks you ought to choose another route, then you know that your church staff has dealt with things like this. There's somebody on this church staff, if not more, several, who have helped families have difficult conversations. And so know that your church is a resource for you in that. Now, speaking of things that can be wonderful, can also be really emotional, have you considered a willed body program? There are several major medical centers in Dallas that have a willed body program. I have listed UT Southwestern's number here, just so you have one. This isn't because I get kickbacks from UT Southwestern. This is so you'd have at least one choice. But the truth is, if you put willed body programs Dallas County into Google, you'd get 8. Now, well, the issue there is there a stewardship of your own body that's important to you, and which is also shared by those who you love? And so I know my wife and I had that conversation. I thought it might go hard. I wanted to be a part of a willed body program. She said, yeah, that makes sense. And so a conversation I thought was going to be harder was not hard. So then there is also the issue of whether you are currently signed up or might think about signing up for an organ or tissue donation program. And again, I have given you a website here of a deeply reputable organ donor program. Some of you have already designated it on your driver's license, and so you may already have done this. Okay. Then let's move to have you given information and instructions to the persons who will be responsible for key things at the point of your death. Now, this is largely what's covered in the Putting Your House in Order. Just want to be specific about a few things. So, your obituary, the kind of service you want. Okay, what are we talking about there? Now, just to use the technical language of the church, if there is a body, it's a funeral. If there isn't a body, it's a memorial service. So if you hear that language, I just wanted you to know that in 9 out of 10 churches, that's the language that's being used. So there will be some families who say, oh, but there'll be so many relatives coming who haven't seen Uncle Frank for years, and they will want to see him. And they won't arrive in time to go to the funeral home for a visitation. We must have a funeral. And in addition to that, we must have an open casket. Well, the interesting thing is with the way we are trending, there are fewer and fewer funerals, therefore fewer and fewer people making the decision about caskets and open or closed, and if they're open, will we allow all of those attending the funeral to pass by, as they say in the African American church. And it's what the funeral directors call it, a pass by. So what's at issue there? Well, again, it's not like there's a Christian answer and a non-Christian answer. But just so you know, funeral has a casket, memorial service. So at a funeral, there's still eulogies and all of that. It's just that you have the added possibility of what you might consider that last moment intimacy. And I myself find that deeply appealing, even simply because I've seen some extraordinarily tender things happen in those moments. I've also seen some really, really intense things happen. Intense in the best sense. Just people really, really feeling things. But I say to families that I've worked with, grief is not a disease. And so your loved ones, letting your loved ones know whether you'd like a funeral or memorial service is good. And that, of course, brings into play cremation or embalming. Letting your loved ones know where your life insurance policies are, whether you have it, where the policies can be found. And this is a crucial point. I know Paul will back me up on this. Being clear that you remember who the beneficiaries are. And that if you've named a beneficiary 15 years ago and that person has died and you haven't updated your policy, then you just want to be clear about all of those things. Your loved ones would want to know information pertaining to any benefits you have from current or former employers, the retirement funds that you've had that they may know nothing about. And then, things like birth certificate, marriage license, spouse's birth certificate, just so incredibly important in some cases to have those, and therefore important to know where they are. And location of a safety deposit box, and where the keys are. This is one of those things. Well, I have a safety deposit box. Good for you. Does anyone know what bank it's at or what institution it's at? Now, in order to be clear about the accumulated assets that we're talking about here, there are the things covered by a will, things like real property. Then there are things that are not covered by a will. They're generally referred to as non-probate assets. And there is a handout in your clip packet, which I hope will be deeply helpful to you in just specifying what non-probate assets are. These are the things that are not cared for in the probate process. These are things that are cared for. In other words, the will doesn't say how they get disposed. And so it's really important to, as you do your planning, both with financial planners and attorneys, to be clear about those. Okay. Now, basic issues related to your gratitude to God, your love of your church, and other forms of generosity. So here we're talking about, of course, the drawing of a will and the paying attention to this is a primary form of love and generosity to your loved ones. So here what we're talking about is, in addition to the love and care you show to the loved ones who you name as beneficiaries, to what extent do you want to continue your love for God after your death? And so this is the place in which I know it's a blessing that this church has a permanent endowment fund. So there is a vehicle now for receiving gifts. And then I'd want to raise simply the question, have you thought about how much of your generosity will be in current gifts versus deferred gifts? In other words, are there people, as you come toward the end of life, are there people that you want to give a gift to right now because they have an immediate need? Or is all of your giving going to be deferred until the point of your death? There's not a good or bad there. It's just people have different life situations. And so sometimes you might be asking, gosh, is there someone I love so dearly and who has such a particular need now that in essence I will give the portion that I thought I'd give them after my death now? This interestingly happens in some families in which an older adult has a child fully capable of caring for him or her, and the truth is that older adult wants to be cared for by his or her children, not by a paid caregiver. And I'm not saying this happens a whole lot, but I've seen some remarkable instances in which, in essence, a family, an older man or woman or couple, say to one of their children, we're going to gift you with a living so you can care for us. And the last time I saw it, it was one of the most remarkable gifts. A guy who'd been working as an engineer. He was a really good one. He loved his mother and father in a way that was just really amazing. He was really devoted to his parents. So when they said, we really want it to be you who cares for us, and it wasn't one of those sick kind of enmeshed things. It was a truly healthy situation. And they said, we'd really like you to be our caregiver, but we know that we'd be asking a lot. So we're going to decide to spend down our estate and ask you to be our caregiver. Well, that's an unusual situation, but I did at least want to bring it up. Okay. Now, one more of the printed resources in the clip packet is something that the foundation puts out. It's called Your Goal, Your Gift. It's kind of greenish and yellow. It's printed on both sides. And what we've attempted to do here is to provide for you 4 things that you'd want to know about making any kind of gift or bequest. What your goal is, that is what you're hoping to do, what the instrument, what the financial instrument is for doing that, how you do it, and what your benefits are for it, tax advantages, etc. So we're hoping that this proves to be deeply helpful to you, because these are lots of different ways to make gifts. And I'll give one more testimony. So there was a man in the last congregation I served was North Haven congregation in North Dallas, and there was a really cool guy who was a member, just devoted to his mother, and he'd had a wonderful business life, and but she had not. She was really truly needy. And she set up he set up a charitable trust to provide her, and he knew, this was an interesting thing, he was dying. So he knew his mother would outlive him. And he knew his mother had very limited ability to care for herself. And so he wanted to make provision for her. And he set up what's called a charitable trust. And it provided her with a guaranteed piece of income per year that was going to be fully able to meet her needs. And at the time of her death, it went to his church. Well, at this church, we set up the permanent endowment fund while I was there. And it had a modest amount in it for several years. And we gave little workshops once a year like this, and we hoped that we were planting seeds. And 3 or 4 years after I left that parish, I got a phone call from the pastor saying, "Did you know that Greg Castle had set up a charitable remainder trust for his mother, and the church is the beneficiary?" I said, "No. I knew he attended one of our workshops to let people know what their possibilities were. I had no idea he'd set one up." He said, "Do you know that the church is going to receive $975,000 from this?" And so all of a sudden, this beautiful set of things came together. This man's devotion for his mother, the fact that the church had cared enough about the membership to say, "Have you looked at end-of-life issues?" As your church has. I thank you for that. And then just giving him something like this that gave him the idea, well, if I set this up, it would provide my mother with this, the advantage to me would be this, the beneficiary for it would be this, and that man breathed his last breath more easily because he'd prepared for his mother. So we want you to know what your options are. And whether this investment is with a bank or financial institution or with us, we want you to know. And one of our core values at the foundation is if somebody can give you better service than us, you ought to go with them. But thank you for that tiny little commercial moment, okay? And if, now, I'm the first level for the foundation, so if you have particular questions about financial instruments, fortunately, there's a 1-800 number here, and that's for calling the foundation to talk to the frontliners who really, really know, who have the lowdown on each of these instruments. Okay, so we're landing the plane now. So you've got, if you're someone, and I gotta always know that in some congregations there's going to be someone who always consults Dr. Internet, who is an internet surfer extraordinaire. If you really want to know about the probate process, put Texas Probate Passport in Google and you'll get this extraordinary document prepared by the Texas Young Lawyers Association that'll tell you everything you ever wanted to know about probate. And you've got, you've got the FAQ about the willed body program, you've got the myths and facts about healthcare directive initiatives, healthcare advance directives. You've got this listing of what counts as non-probate assets, and you've got a way to figure out, if I were to make a gift to remember my church, how would I do that? So, friends, my daddy, using the terminology of a bygone era, my daddy would say, when your cassette runs out, you stop. And my cassette just ran out. So if you have questions, I'll try to answer them or give you a source of someone who could. Paul?
Thank you so much.
Yeah.